My first job after college was teaching at a fabric chain store in Chicago. Setting up 20 folding chairs in the middle of the store 15 minutes prior to the demonstration was my classroom. Since then, I've taught in almost every possible venue, with my TV studio being my favorite classroom. Over the years, I've tweaked and personalized common techniques. They've been gathered and published in an A to Z reference, and I'd like to share with you a sampling of these techniques. I hope you'll enjoy. Sewing A to Z, that's what's coming up next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, a complete line of sewing, quilting, and embroidery machines and sergers. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Madeira, specializing in embroidery, quilting, and special effect threads, because creativity is never black and white. Koala Studios, fine sewing furniture custom built in America. Clover, makers of sewing, knitting, quilting, and embroidery products for over 25 years. Experience the Clover difference. Amazing Designs and Class A Needles.
A is for anchor cloth. Stitch on an anchor cloth a small folded fabric to solve issues when seaming tricky fabrics. We're going to start the A to Z sewing process by working with one of the simplest of all techniques. Sometimes when you're working with shears or knit fabrics, when you start a seam, you may find a beginning stitch that looks something like this. It's not flat because the needle has forced the fabric into the feed dog area. This doesn't happen at all machines, but if it does, this is a simple way to resolve it. Reach into your wastepaper basket, find a scrap of fabric, maybe fold it in half so you have two thicknesses of medium weight fabric, and start to sew into this fabric. When working on the sheer fabric, I double checked my needle because that could also solve the problem. I use a size 70, a universal needle, a very fine needle, perhaps a 60 if the fabric was very fine. And then just start to stitch into the anchor cloth. And as you get to the edge of the fabric, then simply butt or kiss the fabric next to the anchor cloth and sew from one to the other. And as you might guess, when you reach the end, you're just going to clip off the anchor. Just like a boat anchor, you're going to release it, and there you have your seam, and it's nice and flat. If you'd like to start sewing with a little shorter stitch length, that might be a great idea. Replace the area back stitching or reverse stitching. Knits are another fabric that sometimes need a little help with an anchor. And when working with a stretch knit fabric, as I'm going to do right now, I often like to work with a wobble stitch. We're going to talk about knit seams later on in this series, but I'll set my machine for a zigzag stitch, and rather than have this wide stitch, I'm going to shorten it to a 0.5 or a 1.0. The length I like to increase to 0.5. Grab your anchor cloth, place it underneath the fabric, start just sewing into that area, and for a stretchy seam, a very slinky fabric, you just simply easily go from one fabric to the other. Little side note, notice how I pin parallel when working with knit seams. And after cutting the threads, you get the picture. You're going to remove the anchor just by a clip. And that's our first sewing tip of sewing A to Z. B is for belt loops. They're easy to make with your serger or your sewing machine. When working with your serger, you can make great belt loops, or truthfully, I use this technique more to make trim. This is a cover stitch belt loop, and you can see on the underside the cover stitch and that there are 3 threads, or you can use 2 threads as I've made in this belt loop. To work with this on your serger, make sure that it can work with a cover stitch or a chain stitch. I have my machine set up for 3 threads and a cover stitch. You can see the serger cones, and then for the cover stitch there's a 4th thread. Or if you just want to use 2 needles, then simply use the left and the right needle, not the center needle. Follow your instructions. I always reference my guide for setting up for a cover stitch because it seems I don't always remember all the steps. So work with a 2-thread or a 3-thread cover stitch. Follow the directions, and then on the plate of the cover stitch, which covers the blade area, you'll be able to attach a belt loop maker, and it's a terrific little guide, and it fits in the 2 screw areas, and then you align it, it adjusts, and you align it so it goes right down the center of the needles. And I'll just tighten this. The tray that feeds the fabric is about 1 inch wide. The instructions will tell you exactly how wide to cut your fabric, and this has been cut that width, and notice that the end has been shaped. And you place right sides up the end through the guide, pass it through a little bit, and then just start to serge. And keep on serging, and as it serges, that's all you have to do. You can kind of just use the presser control. You don't have to really guide the fabric because it comes out perfectly stitched with 3 parallel rows of stitching, the cover stitch covering the raw edges, trim on this side, belt loops on that side. You have a lot of variety. But if you don't have a serger, you can certainly make belt loops in a very simple way. And I have a quick little sample to show you. You can cut strips any size you'd like to make them, perhaps starting off with 2 inches or 1.5 inches, and fold it in half and press, meeting the raw edges on the side. Then press the edges to the middle. Press each edge to the middle, and on this sample, I've pressed the edges to the middle. And the final stitch, just to use your straight stitch and stitch down the edges. This is a wider belt loop. You could make a narrow belt loop using this pressing technique. Press in half and then press the edges to the middle is the fastest way, and a great technique to add to your sewing repertoire. C is for cutting out patterns. Use these streamline techniques whether you use a shears or a rotary cutter. If you do any garment sewing, you've seen a layout such as this. The first thing that I do in working with pattern pieces is roughly lay out the pieces. I don't always follow the pattern guide, trying to make certain that all these fit within the certain area, just roughly lay them out. I do tend to like to lay everything with, let's say, the shoulder all in one direction. In other words, one-way layout. It's just a sure thing to make sure things are even. I match the cut edges at the top. I don't necessarily use the pre-fold, and then start placing if any pattern pieces are on the fold. You can see in this particular piece I've laid it on the fold, and then I pin at a diagonal, pin to the corners. It makes it easier to cut with the pins at the corners. When placing a pattern on the grain line, rather than measuring using a tape measure, I like to use a quilting ruler, a 6 by 24 inch quilting ruler. It's wider, flatter, easier to measure from the cut edge to the grain line to get the pattern piece on the straight, and it covers a big area so that you know that it is on the grain line. I put all pattern pieces on the grain, or if they're on the fold line, and then I pin the corners. Double check that area, it was straight, and then I would pin around in the corners. Pin at a diagonal. Now when cutting out, use a shears, a long shears, or use a rotary cutter. Now if you're using a rotary cutter, notice that I have a mat underneath. But with the shears you can simply cut. I think you get the idea with this. But if you have the mat, using a small blade, an 18 millimeter or a 45 millimeter blade, this is 28 millimeter blade, you can simply cut all common areas. And then after you've cut this out, now notice I don't always have all my pins in the place, but you cut all hem lines, and then you can cut right in the middle. You can start in the middle of the area and cut around. Now after you've cut out your pattern pieces in this section, you could gently move your mat to accommodate the other pattern pieces. But these are my favorite techniques. Speed and accuracy. As long as you place things on the grain, you can easily cut them out. D is for double needles. If one needle is good, sometimes 2 can be even better. If you've never used a double or a twin needle, I encourage you to give it a try. There are so many options, from creative to functional and very heirloom sewing techniques that can be accomplished with the use of one shank attached with 2 needles. You only need 1 bobbin. The bobbin will go zigzag between the 2 threads and accommodate both. worked with either lightweight fabrics to knits to heavyweight denim fabrics. Now, the sizes of the denim needles are determined by the millimeter distance between the needles. This is a 6.0 double needle, 4.0, 3.0, 2.0, and the finest 1.6. If you're wondering where you use these various needles, I'll give you some guidelines. The 6.0 is probably the needle that has the greatest limitations, so that's why I'm going to describe it first. Most feed dog areas have an opening to accommodate 4 millimeter widths. The newer machines go up to much wider, up to 8. So make sure that you have a machine that can accommodate a 6.0 millimeter opening. This would make a great needle to do decorative stitching using either the right or the wrong side of the stitch. The 4.0 and the 3.0 I often use for knits. And you can also get the double needles in a stretch needle, which the blue shows. 2.0 and 1.6 are often used for heirloom sewing or lightweight fabrics. Regarding the thread, you'll need 2 threads. 2 spools of threads I like to work with, and 1 thread I have unthreaded from the top, and the second thread is feeding from the underside. The reason, when threading the threads through the machine, I like to accommodate it as one, and by having them go in opposite directions, they do not twist. Now I've pulled out the slack of the needles, close the top lid, and you can use just a straight stitch. Obviously that would be what you need to work with, and just let it stitch. Now I'm going to use more of it as a decorative. Just do some scalloping. I have a 3.0, and you can see just by turning, you can use it for hemming, but it sews like a straight stitch because it is a double straight stitch. And as I pull it off, let me cut the threads. And I would do many more meanderings of this stitch, but you can see how easy it works and decorative. And you'll see later in this series, it can be very functional. E is for easing seams. When one seam edge is longer than the other, let the machine's feed dogs effortlessly ease the fabric as you stitch. You'll be surprised the number of times that you'll use this technique of easing, letting the machine's feed dogs bite or gather the fabric. You always put the longer layer toward the feed dogs. Let me explain. In this pattern, we have princess style seams, and the seams shape around the body. The dart or the shaping is incorporated within the seam. And you'll see in a few minutes that one of the seam pieces is a little bit longer than the other. When I pin the front to the side front, matching the notches above and below the area, here is one area where it has shaped is longer, as it sticks out longer than the other area. And you can kind of see the difference. It shapes a little underneath, it's a little bit longer like this. You can see it kind of gapes. Traditionally in a pattern, the instructions usually express to do directional stitching. I don't like directional stitching at all. Directional stitching means sewing always from the bottom to the top. Both sides sewing bottom to top. If you did that, one side of your garment is going to be perfect, the other side is going to have puckers. So I always sew with a longer layer toward the feed dog, which means one time you'll be sewing, let's say, the left side from the bottom to the top and the right side from the top to the bottom, but you will not have any puckers. So I have this area pinned together, and the area that's exposed, I'm simply going to match those areas so that as I pin or as I stitch, they'll be matched together a little bit better. And you'll see what happens. The longer layer, put it toward the feed dog, and this time I'm actually going to be stitching from the shoulder seam to the hem, but it's not going to matter, it'll be just a great seam. So now we have a 1-to-1 ratio of this seam. I'm just stitching along. And as I get to this area that has the easing, notice how this longer layer sticks out. And if you just kind of match the edges, this pattern has 1/2-inch seam allowances, so that's why I'm working with this narrower seam width. And I'll just work with it. And even though it was extending quite a bit longer as the machine stitches, it just automatically eases everything into place. And you'll be surprised how much fabric you can ease into an area. So all the shape of that seam, and you can see even on the underside, it's a little puckered a little bit because it's been eased into place. After pressing it open, as we have on this side, everything has been neatly shaped and eased into place, forming the Great Princess seam, incorporating the dart without any puckers. F is for fabric tubes. I'll show you how one quick motion turns a tube right side out. Whether you're working with spaghetti straps or wide belts, you can easily turn them right side out using your favorite notion. And I like to use the turner that has a cylinder, and then the second part has a wire with a corkscrew end, and the two go together along with the fabric. So a seam allowance for your fabric, sewing the tubes together and sewing the end closed. If you have a very wide or long, very long tube, then leave an opening in the middle instead of at the end. Insert the cylinder inside the fabric and the wire inside the cylinder. The corkscrew end comes out, just turn it so it comes out the end, and it's right in this area, and start to pull on the wire. You may want to slightly press the seam allowance open with your thumb as you're going down the cylinder, and just pull it. Now half of this has been turned, so go to the middle again, insert the cylinder, and repeat the process. Big or small, from very narrow to very large, you can quickly turn tubes right side out. Now, obviously, what we'd have to do for this tube is to do a little pressing, work the end out, and in the middle there's an opening. A little hand sewing, or even just a little touch of a fusible web could fuse that closed, but with one motion, just pulling out that wire, you can turn it right side out effortlessly. It's one of my favorite A to Z sewing techniques. G is for gathers. Use this streamlined technique to gather any fabric. There are many ways that you can gather fabric, and the technique that I'd like to share with you first of all is the very traditional technique, and that is to sew 2 rows of stitches parallel with each other, maybe lengthened a little bit, about at half of an inch and 3/8 of an inch, give or take. You can just kind of guess. And then to gather, go to the wrong side and pull the bobbin threads. The bobbin threads always pull a little bit more readily than the top threads. But before you do the pulling, you'll need to go to the top side again, place a pin in the fabric and wrap around your threads so that you don't pull out one end as you're pulling on the other. And you can certainly do this. This is the most traditional of all gathering techniques, and I use it on occasion, but truth be told, it's not my favorite technique for gathering, so I'd like to show you that technique next. And that is gathering over the bobbin thread. And if you're wondering how this is going to work, we're going to be sewing 1 stitch in the fabric on the wrong side, not with a zigzag, but with a straight stitch to begin with. And then we're going to grab the top thread, and I have the top thread that I'm holding, lower the presser foot, and take 1 stitch. And as I raise the presser foot, you can maybe see that I'm pulling up through the fabric. This darker purple thread is the bobbin thread, and pull this thread as long or just a little bit longer than your fabric. I'm going to raise the presser foot, and then also to release the thread to make sure that the top and bobbin are the same length. Tuck it underneath the thread, underneath the foot, and twist. Twist these together, then lower the presser foot. This is going to be the thread you're going to stitch over, zigzag over to be specific. We're going to set the machine for a zigzag stitch, simple zigzag, maybe widen it by 1 width, do a little testing to see, but we're sewing on the wrong or right side of the fabric, doesn't really matter, and then just sew. Zigzag over the threads. Now you have 2 threads, so it's a little stronger than just gathering 1 thread. And because I'm using the bobbin thread and the top thread, I'm not going to have any issues of pulling out the threads. You know, I don't have to, at this end of the fabric, I don't have to have a needle there, or pin there and wrap the threads around. Now I just go to the thread that I have stitched over and quickly gather. It is the most streamlined way of gathering. If you want really tight stitches, shorten, or tight gathers, shorten the length of the stitch so that the zigzag is closer together, and they'll be just a little tighter. This is the width I normally use, but that is my favorite, and I think the easiest way to gather. Quilt. The term itself means comfort when sewn with love and given to a child suffering with a life-threatening illness or to a child who is a victim of abuse. The comfort of this quilt is exponential. I'd like you to welcome Bob Urquhart. Bob is the chapter director for Quilts for Kids, the Illinois chapter, who is a champion for providing quilts to those who need them most. Bob, welcome.
Well, thank you, Nancy, for having me and allowing me to be here.
When I first met you and talked with you, you told me that one of the first quilts you made was for Quilts for Kids.
That's correct. I was starting on a quilt, but from your ombre quilting show. But I decided that after doing some research that Quilts for Kids was a charity that I wanted to become associated with, and because they had a twofold mission to make quilts for children who were seriously ill, and to also help keep fabric out of landfills. Because a lot of fabric is dumped if it's not sold. And so Quilts for Kids would take donated fabric and make these quilts for children who were suffering usually from cancer or some form of abuse.
Sure. And they are fun. They're a four patch is kind of the style that you encourage.
And it's a very easy pattern. The only block that is actually assembled by the quilter is the four patch. And everything for the quilt, except the batting and the thread, is provided in a pre-cut kit that we send free of charge to anyone requesting them from either our website or
I think this is amazing. So that you get all the instructions, you've gathered the instructions, you have a little brochure, you even have a label.
Right.
So that you can, if you don't have the fabric at home in your stash, you can certainly just find it, and through the website that you'll find, we'll reference a little bit later. Now, these sizes, they're not that large.
No, they're about 42 inches by 48. And those sizes we've found are really good for children up to about age 8 or 9.
Sure.
We do ask if quilters are more experienced and able to make a larger quilt up to like a twin size, because we do serve children up to 18 years old that are in the hospital.
Sure.
And
these are 100% cotton, so that they can be laundered and loved and used. And,
right, and that's, these aren't quilts to be just hung or on a wall. They're meant to be used by kids, drug around, and comfort.
Yes.
That's correct.
Now, as an Illinois chapter, you have donated these quilts locally.
Correct. We have donated our quilts to Children's Memorial Hospital to the oncology unit, and they have requested approximately 50 quilts per month. So it's a pretty big challenge.
It is. And there are, if you're not in the Chicagoland area, you will find on our website referencing to Bob, the website of the Illinois chapter, so you can work with your local, you may work with your local chapter, but you give this great kit away.
Right.
That's so wonderful.
That's what makes us kind of unique from other quilt organizations.
Now, you mentioned that one of the most heartwarming things or portions of your donation is to go to the hospital and present these quilts.
Right, to see the child's face light up when they're receiving chemotherapy and they get one of these quilts is just an unbelievable experience. And a couple of weeks ago, right before Thanksgiving, we went and donated quilts, and it was just a truly memorable experience.
The gift is always in the giving.
That's correct. And it definitely comes through the love that is put into the making of these quilts.
And you're a relatively new quilter.
Oh, definitely, yes. Yeah, less than a year.
And look what you have done. And to prove that you were worthy of being the chapter director, you made the first quilt, submitted it.
Right, got it approved. And But I think a lot has to go back to you, because without your inspiration,
Oh, well, you're sweet. You're sweet. But Bob, I thank you. And I know that many of our viewers will be going to your website, finding it out. And if you'd like to find out more about this program, I'd like you to go to nancyzieman.com and click on Nancy's Corner. And at Nancy's Corner, you will be directed right to the website for Quilts for Kids, the Illinois chapter, and Bob's great work, and all the others that are with it. And also at nancyzieman.com, you'll see additional episodes of and you'll see my blog, and there'll be a lot more information there. Thanks for being with us for this first program of Sewing A to Z. Bye for now.
Nancy has written a full-color, fully illustrated book entitled Nancy Zieman Sewing A to Z that includes all the information featured in this series. It's $19.99 plus shipping and handling. To order the book, call 800-336-8373 or visit our website at sewingwithNancy.com/2501. Order item number Y0005. Nancy Zieman Sewing A to Z. Credit card orders only. To pay by check or money order, call the number on the screen for details. Visit Nancy's website at nancyzieman.com to see additional episodes, Nancy's blog, and more. Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, has been brought to you by Baby Lock, Madeira Threads, Koala Studios, Clover, Amazing Designs, and Class A Needles. Closed captioning funding provided by Rowenta. Sewing with Nancy is a co-production of Nancy Zieman Productions and Wisconsin Public Television.